I'm telling him I got all these celebrities to activate and do all these things. He's like, oh, did you work with our PR team? I said, no. He goes, oh, what was your budget? 0. Well, how did you get that done? DMs. Yeah. I started building relationships with all these people.
All right, welcome back to Play It Back. I'm here with Shanda Maloney.
Hi.
Longtime friend.
Yes.
And you were the director of digital and social for UFC.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm in
You're
your
at my
house. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Excited to be here. First of all, really cool house. But second of all, to chat about the McGregor Diaz fight,
yes.
Which sounds like it was insane.
One.
The first one.
UFC 202.
Yep, which sounds insane. But also just your experience as a creative professional,
yeah.
And what drives you. So first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh man, where do we begin? I was the director of digital and social media for UFC. I was with the company for about 7.5 years and originally started off as the marketing manager, working with all the cable operators with pay-per-view and live event sales. And then in 2013, they asked me to take over social. And social was still fairly new for brands. And so Snapchat wasn't a thing yet. Instagram was still pretty new. So
Instagram barely had videos in 2020.
Yeah, exactly. So, I got to be there from the beginning of brands really being on social. So that wasn't such an exciting time for us to just like figure out what we were doing, mm-hmm. right? So it was such an amazing opportunity. And then to start figuring out how to integrate social into the broadcast and getting the athletes and educating them on what to say and what not to say on the internet.
Always fun.
Exactly.
Well, and that's how we got to know each other.
Yep.
I was leading marketing for Simply Measured,
Yep.
which was a marketing or social media analytics company, which UFC used. And then later on with Tagboard,
yes.
which was a social media for live broadcasts for in-venue events. So we've crossed paths a few ways in that regard. Sounds like a crazy experience. And you've run your own agency since then. You've done a lot of things in the space.
Yeah.
But really excited to hear about that campaign. Before we get into that, though, you're a creative professional. One of the questions I like to ask people when we film these episodes is, what is getting your creative juices flowing right now? What is inspiring you?
Yeah, I mean, I love to see what people are doing from the storytelling perspective. Mm-hmm. And that was really where my impact was with UFC. When I took over social, everything that they were doing was call to action. Call to action, call to action. Order the fight, tune in now, buy your tickets. And that's not the way social was intended to be used, right? It was supposed to be a conversation. And not just changing the tone in what we were writing in our actual captions, but it was actually jumping back in and having a conversation with people instead of just shouting something and then leaving the room, right?
Yeah.
So we changed from the style of what was being written, and that's where I started to look at what other brands were doing and how they were telling their story. And that's where I started looking at, like, how do I do that for 600 athletes and tell their story? Because if you're a fringe fan and you're just like, okay, this sounds like a big event, what I really needed to do is I needed to tell an athlete's story and get people to connect to an athlete and follow that athlete's journey mm-hmm. whenever they fight. And so I had to turn that around. And so when I get to see really creative storytelling, that's what drives me.
Well, and it's such an interesting medium too, because so many sports are focused on the team, the league, the broader sport in general. That can't be the case with fighting. You do follow a fighter. Mm-hmm. Followed Mike Tyson all the way through the 90s. And, so it seems like that's stayed central to UFC's approach, especially mm-hmm. with shows like The Ultimate Fighter and things since then.
Absolutely.
But in the early days, I can't imagine what a big task that was.
It was pretty insane. And, the 2 roles that I had at UFC, the first role being on the pay-per-view marketing side, I was actually able to leverage the relationships that I had with the pay-per-view marketers and being able to work with, Cox in Sacramento and San Diego and say, we've got a fighter from your town. And now they're invested because this is their hometown fighter. And now they're running extra cross-channel promotions saying, hey, watch so-and-so from Chula Vista, watch so-and-so from
That's really
Philadelphia.
cool.
So I was able to integrate a lot of local storytelling with our partners and leveraging that. So it got to branch out even wider, you know?
I think those local markets become super, super huge, especially
Huge.
with a linear and digital component to what you were doing there.
Exactly.
So you mentioned you started looking at other brands. Do you remember, I know this is a while ago now, do you remember any of the brands that you were thinking, okay, I want to emulate them? That's the style and the voice and the approach.
There was so many different ones, and some that were just fun. You've got Wendy's. Wendy's is so memorable, right? They just went rogue with their tone, right? But there was a personality behind it. And so I started to...
Wendy's is fun. Sorry, I didn't mean
to... Yeah, no, go ahead.
Wendy's it's crazy to think about that now when you've got rogue, like Radio Shack going rogue. And some of those examples. Wendy's seems kind of tame by comparison, but they really did pioneer a lot of how that came across on social.
They really did. And I think that was kind of an inspiration for me, for us to say, let's test our tone and what we can get away with and where we can push the envelope a little bit by platform and really kind of understand the audience. What we say on Twitter might not fly on Facebook.
Right.
What we do on Instagram might not work well on Snapchat. So that's when we really started to play with it a little bit. And we had a lot of sarcasm on Twitter, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
And I loved when people would be like, the dude running UFC is so funny. And I'm like, thank you.
I'm the dude.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, and there's a bit of that too, just like the Radio Shack example, where today there's a pretty good understanding among marketing professionals, among social professionals, that you have to approach each channel differently.
Yeah.
That was not the case at that point. There was a unified brand. That's what you did across linear. That's what you did in print. That's what you did in email. And social was shaking that up. And this is the very early days of that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I ended up taking our Instagram. Again, we had like 67,000 followers when I took it over. And it was a lot of the posters, the flyers, text heavy graphics, right? And I reached out to our creative team, our photographers, who are amazing and they do an amazing job. But I said, a lot of the photos that you're using go to Getty. Anybody can access those photos. Mm-hmm. I need to be able to tell a different version of the story that's not seen anywhere else, that feels very intimate and feels very personal. And they loved the idea, but they're like, we don't have the time. We don't have the bandwidth.
Oh, interesting.
So I find this guy, and he was a digital sales manager for BMW, happened to just do a lot of photography with some athletes in Albuquerque, named Wilson Fox. He's incredible. And I said, Wilson, I have this idea. I have no money. I can buy your flight. I can pay your hotel, and I can get you a backstage pass.
And it will be the coolest.
And it'll be the coolest thing ever.
The coolest project you've ever worked on.
But I can't pay you.
Yeah.
You want to do it? And he said, absolutely. So Wilson and I worked together, and we started to really find some amazing, beautiful ways to tell these fighters' stories, from the struggle of the weight cut all the way to the walkout, to winning the belt. You know what I mean? And being able to show that on Instagram just felt so, and like the way that we were writing the caption was like, what would it feel like to you? What's your walkout song? What's your feeling your heartbeat? I get goosebumps when I think about it, because even being there, I know what that felt like, but being able to tell a story and put somebody else there mentally and visually through that storytelling on Instagram, it was just incredible.
Well, and it's such a cool opportunity too, because fighters are really dynamic, complex people, but all you see is them in the ring fighting.
Yes.
So being able to experience that journey and how they're thinking about things and how they're hyping themselves up adds such a cool layer to that too.
One of Wilson's shots, and actually it was one of Conor's fights, and a lot of the shots that we would get for the weigh-in would be the fighter on the scale, and you would see the big screen in the background, right? And I told Wilson, I said, get on the stage, because I want the back. I want to be able to see the fans from that perspective. And so there's the shot of Conor McGregor, and he's flexing on the screen, and there's all these fans. It's a black and white shot.
That's cool.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I was like, that's our view. That's our view. That's the perspective I want the fans to be able to see.
What does it feel like to be him in that
exactly.
case? Well, that's a good transition. Let's talk about Conor McGregor.
Conor's awesome. Nate's awesome. UFC 202. an experience to be able to be a part of that, and to be able to be a part of Conor from the beginning. You know, I met Conor on his very first trip to America. I was probably like the second or third person he met in the building. And to be able to be there from the very beginning and kind of see where he's evolved to now, it's such a cool thing that I get to live, like, just have that
That's
moment.
pretty cool.
And, yeah.
Set the stage for who Conor McGregor is and who he was, why this fight was a big deal at the time, why it was so crazy.
Yeah, you know, Conor just has this absolute knowingness of winning, you know, and that was Mystic Mac. That's his name, you know, Mystic Mac, is he predicts these things, and he's so sure of himself that a lot of people feel like it's just arrogance, right? But when you really understand his mentality, like, I get it, because that's personally how I live my life and how I grow in my career. I manifested UFC. I wrote it down on a napkin on an airport in Tucson, Arizona, on my way back to Vegas, and then UFC called me 13 months later. So, like, I love it. I understand Conor and how he thinks about things, right?
And if you're not familiar with UFC, Conor McGregor is one of the biggest fighters in the world, most successful at this point.
Yeah.
But came up through challenging circumstances and decided this is who he was going to be.
And then you've got Nate Diaz, on the other hand, who comes from, you know, the Stockton Lodi area and just nitty gritty, and him and his brother, I mean, they're just down to scrap and fight anybody, anytime, anywhere. They will say that. They are down whenever. And I love that about them. I love the Diaz brothers. And two guys with that kind of confidence and shit talking.
Yep.
Like, it was the most exciting event. And then things start to get heated. You start to do your press tours. You do your, you know, your press conferences and your on-sale conferences. And the friction between these two start to get wild. I mean, to the point.
Was it real friction?
Oh, yeah. It was definitely real friction. And there was one press conference that we did, and Conor throws like a Monster Energy drink or something, and then Nate throws his water bottle at him, turns it into a whole thing. And it was just like, all right, this is where we're at. You know what I mean? And a lot of times, there was a lot of fights that happened, but there's something special about these ones. And a lot of times, Conor, he just happens to, you know, he just knows how to pick at you.
Yeah.
You know, so it was so much fun to be there for that whole thing.
In the UFC, as a fight promoter in general, you want to capitalize on that because you want to build off this animosity and the momentum and the energy that comes from that. What's the lesson that you would pass on to other marketers who may, like, maybe that's not what's intuitive for them, but it's still something that potentially they could leverage?
I will tell you that there were, and not just the Conor and Nate fight, there were many fights where things happen and the social team is like, Shanda, do I post it? What do we do? And I'm like, post it.
Yeah.
If I get in trouble, I'll beg for forgiveness later. Run with it, right?
Yeah.
So when the water bottle monster can thing happened, we took, this was when the water bottle flip challenge was real popular. So we took the video of Conor throwing the Monster Energy drink, Nate throws the water bottle, and then we do the flip club challenge. And we had UFC 202 printed on the water bottle. It was hilarious. And Vine was still a thing. So it was a Vine. And that was viral.
I remember this because you were hitting us up to get some of the data around it. I think we had to do an extra API call to Twitter about this.
Because we ran out of like Excel sheet cells to be able to like, how many impressions did we get? Yeah.
Oh, great play. Well, and that's what I love about what you did at UFC, what they're still doing, and just the industry in general is that narrative comes first, and creating a story that people want to follow along. We're in this world where I'm a B2B marketer. On the B2B side, everyone is trying to create these brand experiences in this media company environment now. Right. And there's so many lessons to learn from how you guys did that so well.
And a lot of times people ask me this question all the time. They said, well, how do you know what works? And I'm like, test it.
Yeah.
Just try. If it fails, fail fast.
Yep.
Fail fast, learn and move. And not only that, but like if it failed in one place, and we just said this, right? Maybe it didn't work on Twitter. Try it on Facebook. If it didn't work on Facebook, maybe it works on Instagram. Maybe it works on LinkedIn. figure out where that content works, because it might not be a bad idea. It just might not be the right place.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Well, and so that's the lead up. We got the weigh-ins. We got the stare downs.
Yeah.
As you get closer to the fight, what are some of the things that... Talk to me about the war room that we were just chatting about, that you and your team are in, and how you're thinking through how you handle something like this. Who's involved in it, first of all?
Yeah. So,
and then what is each person focused on?
So the social team, you know, it's a small team.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had people all over the world, but it's still a small team, and we were small and mighty that had to do a lot of things, and occasionally had to bring in some extra resources for stuff. In this particular event, we had to actually reach out to Tagboard, and I said, I want to do this activation with Tagboard, and we really wanted to figure out how to get the fans super close to the athletes. How do you get your message to them, right? And I had seen that, I think it was the New England Patriots, I believe it was them, that they did a social activation where the tweets were on the walkout tunnel. I said, I want to get closer. We're going in the locker room.
Nice.
We're going to activate in the locker room. So we activated with Tagboard, and we had a emoji that when you tweeted hashtag UFC 202 or hashtag Nate Diaz or hashtag Conor McGregor, it was either the crown for Conor, because he's always got the crown thing with his tattoo on his chest and everything. Nate, we had him do the 100 emoji, like the red one, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we changed it to say Diaz, because he always tweeted that 100. So we just changed that emoji to say Diaz. And then UFC 202 would be a belt. So whenever you used any of those 3 hashtags, so we did this campaign, we worked with Twitter to do these custom emojis. We added the hashtag on the actual octagon. So when you're watching the fight, it would be like, you know, I think it was Toyo Tires, I think was the sponsor. And then it would be hashtag Nate Diaz, hashtag. And that was the first time that we actually were able to get our hashtag integrated into the actual octagon. So that was a big deal for us.
That was early for custom emojis from Twitter too, wasn't it?
Super early. And
you guys pioneered a lot of this stuff.
It was super fun. And then we did... Whenever you tweeted your message to Nate or Conor, we had a tag board in each of their locker rooms. So I've got this photo of Nate like shadow boxing, and the tag board's right behind him, and it's all these messages from fans if they did like fan art or good luck Nate or whatever the case might be.
That's really cool.
So I had Farron. I was like, girl, I don't got enough people to do all the jobs. So girl, I need to use you, and you need to get his message to his board and his message to his board, make sure to not mix them up. You know, she was awesome. So we had to leverage some of our partners to activate. So we had a team that would
I promise this episode is not sponsored by Nate, Josh, Farron, the tag board team. We love you guys though.
We do love you. But yeah, so we had our social team that would be, you know, boots on the ground, who's backstage, who's getting the walkouts, who's getting, you know, some celebrity shots. We had somebody that was always focused on celebrity activation. Then we had Farron at Tagboard doing the tweets to the Jumbotron. It was the very first social activation that T-Mobile Arena ever did on their big LED screen outside. So she was pushing stuff to that, doing the 2 boards. We had a lot of things going on for a small and mighty team.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I got to ask this question. What went wrong? What during this campaign didn't work that you wish had, or something you would do differently?
You know, to be honest with you, I think every event was always crazy. Things always happen. Fighters get injured. Crazy stuff happens. You know, I remember UFC 200, our entire main card fell apart 48 hours before.
McGregor as well, wasn't it?
No, it was John Jones and Daniel Cormier.
Oh, right.
And the whole main card, like, we had to replace 3,500 plus assets in like 48 hours. Like, it was insane. And that, I think we were just so used to that, that anything that could go wrong, we'll get through it.
Yeah.
We'll get through it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
And that was just the mentality of everybody that worked at UFC.
In an event like that, too, you wind up expecting that you're going to work through the night and for several nights, I would
20
imagine.
20 hours a day sometimes,
Brenda, are you glad you're done with that now?
I mean, it was a fun time of my life, but I'm glad I get to like sleep.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's fair.
I get my weekends back, you know.
You got your corgi running around here too. Awesome. So How do you measure success of a campaign like this? I think a lot of folks look at marketing and say, okay, we drove this much revenue through this direct call to action, like you were talking about how they used to do.
Yep.
How did you change the culture in terms of thinking about what works, what doesn't, et cetera?
There was a lot of things that I started to do as I took over social, and it was leveraging, the Simply Measured from the analytics to the different types of tech that we were integrating into our activations. And one of the things that I started doing early, and this is, we're talking early days of Twitter when you didn't even have a stream of being able to see who your verified mentions were from, right? So there was things that was getting lost in the noise for us when you have millions of fans and I didn't see that Demi Lovato tweeted at us or something like that, right? So I remember reaching out to Simply Measured and another company called, they were called Social Bro at one point, and then they were named
Social Bro.
Audience.
Right.
Yeah. So I called
What
Twitter.
a different time.
Right? I called Twitter and I said, hey, how do I find out who our followers are? Like, who follows us that has the highest followers or the verified accounts? They couldn't give me that information. They didn't know. I don't know what it took. Right? Yes. So I start calling around to you guys and I find out, holy crap. Like I call them kind of silent fans or, closet fans, because they were following us, but they didn't engage with us, or we didn't see it because, again, Twitter didn't have that option to just look at your verified mentions. So I decided to start studying that and engaging with them first and bringing them into the conversation. And that turned into developing a relationship with them, inviting them to fights, getting them synced up with their favorite fighters. Demi Lovato is now training with Rashad Evans. You know what I mean? Just the coolest stuff happened.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, fast forward years later, when the UFC got bought out by WME-IMG, and Ari Emanuel, I'm in this executive meeting with Ari Emanuel, who's the CEO, and he's like, I'm telling him I got all these celebrities to activate and do all these things. He's like, oh, did you work with our PR team? I said, no. He goes, oh, what was your budget? 0. Well, how did you get that done? DMs. Yeah. I started building relationships with all these people. And so I've invited Demi Lovato. I invited Ruby Rose. I invited Anthony Bourdain. Anybody that you can think of. I started to establish these relationships, and it was just all through DM, and learning the analytics and figuring out how to make it work to my benefit. So now from an ROI perspective, we're getting even more amplified, right? So our total impressions are through the roof, compared to us just shouting, tune in and watch the pay-per-view, right? We really have people invested in the storytelling and sharing in the excitement
and the
of
lead
the whole
up
thing.
and the background and individual fighters.
And then with doing it with no money.
Yeah.
On top of that.
And that's a lesson that still holds up today. People want to over-processize everything. They want to over-tool everything, automate everything. Just reach out to people sometimes. Find out who your most excited fans are and reach out and talk to them.
So the craziest thing, I was working an event and I got a tweet that's, I remember seeing the email, because Twitter used to email you and say, you have a new follower. And I remember seeing this person had a lot of followers. I was like, that's weird. Delete the email. Didn't think anything of it. I'm working an event in Pittsburgh and a fan says, how the hell did you get at Cristiano to follow you on Twitter? And I didn't know who he was talking about. I didn't know who Cristiano was. And I was like, reply all, including Cristiano. And I was like, because I'm awesome. And then I get back to my hotel, look at, who's Cristiano? Look at that. Cristiano Ronaldo. It's like, oh,
that guy.
I end up realizing that
he was on the email thread.
He was following 51 people and had 30 million followers. And of the 51 people, it was me, UFC, and Dana White. And I was like, oh, he's a fan. Okay. So I turn around and I call our PR team and I'm like, hey, Cristiano Ronaldo.
First of all, can we stop for a second and just say how cool it is that you're one of the 31 people Cristiano Ronaldo was following?
Wild. So I call our PR team and I said, hey, Cristiano Ronaldo follows me on Twitter and the UFC and Dana White. And within a week, he was playing LA Galaxy, and we had our heavyweight champion, Cain Velasquez, go down to the Galaxy game. It was a whole jersey exchange, glove exchange. So again, capitalizing on those opportunities, right? Yep. Jumping on it, strike when the iron's hot.
And the wild days of social too, where you're firing off all these DMs and tweets. There weren't the approval processes and guardrails in for a lot of this stuff too. So it was really easy to get things wrong. What kind of approval processes did you have with your team at UFC?
You know, we got to a point when I took over social, it was me and one other guy who ended up leaving the company shortly after, and then it was one-man band. And I ended up calling my intern from the year prior, who was hoping to get called up to play Major League Baseball, and he didn't get the call. So I said, hey, you want to come work with me on the social team? I have this thing that I have to do. And he was like, yeah, absolutely. So I recruited my intern from the year prior, and then another guy who was the mail runner in the building. So he delivered mail and made sure that there was water bottles in all the refrigerators. And he mentioned to somebody in the office that he wanted to work on my team, and I didn't know him. And I was like, yes, I need help. Like, come talk to me.
He's welcome.
Come talk to me. So I said, Gavin, you want to come work on my team? So I recruited the mail runner and my intern from the year prior. And we just had to buckle down and figure it out. And we spent so much time together. I mean, we literally were a traveling circus on the road 5 days a week, every week for all the events. And we just had to get to a point. Our group chat was ridiculous. Like, it was hilarious. All hours, 2 a.m, 3 a.m, whatever happened. We got to a point where we really synced. And so we had the same voice. So it didn't matter who was jumping in. You couldn't tell which one of us it was.
That's great.
And we also really understood the voice for each channel. And then we really trusted each other, you know, to just be like, you got this. I'll never forget Gavin at a UFC press conference when Daniel Cormier and John Jones got into a scuffle on the stage and like throwing shoes and the whole night. And Gavin texts me and he's like, do I post it? Do I post it? Do I post it? I'm like, go, 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 go. And it was like, thank God we jumped on it, right? Like he had a second of like doubt, texted me for confirmation. I'm like, run with it. And then, you know, we just do. So yeah, it was awesome building that team from like, you know, we called ourselves like the digital outcasts. It was just like building it from the ground up, you know. And now Gavin is the senior director for the Raiders.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Those are the best stories when somebody that you helped mentor and coach comes up like that. So one last question here. That shared voice that you and the team developed is so hard for teams to get, for creative teams to get, and can take years to cultivate. Without spending nights and weekends every single day on the road, what are some of the tips and advice that you would give people who want to?
When we first started out, and this is going back to the early days, when I first took over social, I was like, how are you guys remembering to publish stuff? They were putting like Outlook reminders to post this thing at 7 p.m. And I was like, oh, that's not going to work. So I ended up finding Sprout Social. And that was where we started scheduling stuff. That gave us an opportunity to plan ahead and for them to put things in the draft and for me to review it and for us to tweak together and work proactively in that sense. And so that gave us a little bit of like, while we're constantly working like in the minute, you know, in the moment with everything, that gave us an opportunity to start drafting things ahead of time and then learning from each other. Like everybody had a little bit to chime in and like, oh, reword this or say this or add this emoji and do this thing. So collaboratively, we were doing this together and we just kind of all got on the same page with it. So being able to plan together in that respect, I think helped a lot.
Well, and I think that's I love the OKR framework. I'm a nerd about it. I worked for an OKR company for a long time. The ability to get people on board in that planning process and aligned to the right objectives and the right focus and goals just makes it easier to move quicker too, because everybody's on the same page. There's no waiting for, oh, is this the right thing to work on?
Right.
If what you're doing is pointing in that direction, you have freedom to go for it. Yeah. Yep.
And everybody really kind of got to a point where everybody owned their role, right? So at the end of the night, Gavin was doing, you know, swapping out all the creative to the next event while Brandon's doing the recap, while I'm doing the data analytics to give high level numbers to the executives. You know, I'm going to wait for 24 hours for the rest of the numbers to trickle in. And so everybody was like, fight's over, boom, boom. Everybody goes to their spot, knows what to do. It was such an amazing team, and I'm just so grateful for that opportunity.
Love it. Well, those are lightning in a bottle when you can find it. So that's really exciting. Shanda, thanks so much. Awesome to hear the story about the campaign, but also just your process, your creative background. Love it.
Definitely.
Thanks again.